The rain had just started to fall when the quiet door of the small roadside diner creaked open, and a woman in a worn wheelchair slowly rolled herself inside. Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed the wheels forward. Her clothes were simple, her face pale with exhaustion, and her eyes carried the weight of someone who had traveled far with nowhere certain to go. The diner was nearly empty that evening. Only the hum of the coffee machine and the faint sound of rain tapping the windows filled the room. Behind the counter stood Daniel, a tired single father working his late shift as a waiter, trying to make it through another long day. When the woman softly asked if she could sit somewhere warm for a while, Daniel had no idea that in just a few minutes, 5 black SUVs would pull into the parking lot and bring the entire diner to a stunned silence. Before we continue, if you believe that small acts of kindness can change someone's life, please take a moment to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who believes in humanity, and subscribe to the channel Lonely Dad Strong Heart. Your support helps us bring more real and touching stories like this. Daniel had been exhausted long before the rain started. Life had not been gentle with him. 2 years earlier, his wife had passed away after a sudden illness, leaving him alone to raise his little daughter, Lily. Since then, every day had been a quiet battle. Daniel worked double shifts at the diner, sometimes barely sleeping, just to keep the small apartment and put food on the table. In the mornings he would wake Lily up for school, make her simple breakfast, braid her hair the way her mother used to, and send her off with a smile he often forced through his own pain. By the time his shift started, Daniel already felt like he had lived an entire day. The diner itself was nothing special. It stood along a quiet highway where truck drivers, travelers, and tired workers sometimes stopped for a hot meal. The old neon sign flickered occasionally, and the furniture had seen better days. But to Daniel, the place had become more than just a job. It was the one place where he could keep moving forward without thinking too much about the emptiness waiting for him at home after midnight. That rainy evening had been particularly slow. Only 2 customers sat near the windows, quietly eating their meals. Daniel wiped down the counter, his mind drifting to Lily. She had asked him that morning if he would be home early enough to read her a bedtime story. He had promised he would try, though he already knew the chances were small. Promises had become the hardest part of being a single father. Then the diner door opened, and the disabled woman entered. She looked like someone the world had forgotten. Her wheelchair was old and scratched. Rainwater dripped from the edge of her coat. For a moment she simply sat near the entrance, catching her breath, as if even pushing herself that far had taken enormous strength. Some of the customers glanced at her briefly and then returned to their food. Daniel immediately walked over. Her voice was quiet when she spoke, almost apologetic. She asked if she could sit somewhere inside for a little while to warm up. She explained that she didn't have money for a meal but just needed a place to rest until the rain stopped. Daniel hesitated for only a second. The diner manager had strict rules about people sitting without ordering. But something in the woman's tired eyes reminded him of nights when he himself had felt completely alone in the world. So he nodded and helped guide her wheelchair to a small table near the heater. Without making a big scene, he brought her a cup of hot tea and a bowl of soup that had been left over in the kitchen. He placed it gently in front of her and simply said it was on the house. The woman stared at the food for a moment as if she could hardly believe it. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around the warm cup. She thanked him in a voice so soft it almost disappeared under the sound of the rain outside. Daniel smiled and returned to his work. For the next several minutes, the diner returned to its quiet rhythm. The woman ate slowly, carefully, as if each bite mattered deeply. Daniel checked on his other customers and refilled coffee cups. Then something unusual happened. Outside the diner window, headlights suddenly cut through the rain. One black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Then another. And another. Within seconds, 5 large black SUVs surrounded the small diner, their engines humming loudly in the night. The 2 customers by the window stopped eating and stared outside. Daniel looked up from the counter, confused. The diner door opened quickly, and several men in dark suits stepped inside. Their presence immediately changed the atmosphere of the room. They scanned the diner carefully, their expressions serious and alert. For a brief moment, Daniel worried something terrible had happened. But then one of the men walked directly toward the disabled woman. The entire diner watched in silence. The man leaned down respectfully beside her wheelchair and spoke quietly. His posture was not threatening but protective, almost relieved. The woman slowly set down her spoon. Then, with surprising calm, she turned her wheelchair slightly and looked toward Daniel across the room. For a few seconds, their eyes met. Daniel suddenly felt nervous, unsure of what was happening. The man in the suit then stood and approached Daniel. He asked a simple question. "Are you the one who helped her?" Daniel nodded, still confused. What the man said next would change everything. He explained that the woman sitting in the wheelchair was Eleanor Whitmore, the quiet owner of a massive charitable foundation that funded hospitals, schools, and disability support programs across the country. Despite her wealth, she often traveled anonymously to observe how ordinary people treated those who appeared vulnerable. Earlier that evening, her security team had lost track of her when she insisted on entering the diner alone without revealing who she was. When the rain started and they saw her inside through the window, they immediately surrounded the diner to ensure her safety. Daniel felt completely stunned, but what moved Eleanor the most was not the attention from her security team. It was the small, quiet kindness Daniel had shown when he believed she was simply a poor stranger with nowhere to go. Eleanor slowly wheeled herself closer to Daniel. Her eyes, though tired, now held a warm smile. She told him that kindness is something the world desperately needs, and too often people only show it when they expect something in return. But Daniel had given her warmth, food, and dignity without knowing who she was. And that meant everything. She asked about his life. At first Daniel hesitated, but eventually he shared his story, about losing his wife, raising Lily alone, working long shifts, and trying his best not to let life break him. The diner had grown completely silent. Even the customers were listening now. Eleanor's expression softened deeply. She had spent years funding programs for struggling families, but meeting Daniel reminded her of the real faces behind those statistics. After a moment, she made a decision. A few weeks later, Daniel received a phone call that felt almost unreal. Eleanor's foundation had purchased the small diner and fully renovated it. But instead of replacing Daniel, they offered him the position of manager with a stable salary, flexible hours, and full support for his daughter's education. The small act of kindness he had offered on a rainy night had quietly opened a door he never imagined possible. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something he had nearly forgotten. Hope. Lily noticed the change first. Her father came home earlier. He smiled more. The heavy exhaustion that once followed him everywhere slowly began to fade. And every time Daniel looked at the diner sign glowing in the evening light, he remembered the night a tired woman in a wheelchair simply asked for a place to sit. If you've watched this far, here's a special request. Please comment the word kindness below if you believe small good deeds can change someone's life in ways we never expect. Because sometimes the world doesn't change through grand gestures. Sometimes it changes through one bowl of soup, one warm seat, and one person choosing compassion over indifference. And if this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like the video, leave a comment, share it with someone who believes in humanity, and subscribe to Lonely Dad's Strong Heart so we can continue sharing stories that remind us how powerful kindness truly is.